There have been many psychologists, and there continue to be many psychologists, but for whatever reason, you have this individual in the name of Freud who has transcended this field of psychology. You talk to anyone, you say, hey man, do you know any psychologist? 9 out of 10 times they'll say Freud. For whatever reason, Freud is the one that pops up. And the reason for that, my friends, is this. Freud was saying a lot of things that at his time, when he was alive, were not being said. Freud was one of the first people to really focus on the unconscious. Before him, many people just thought the reason why we think things are because we just constantly think them. And that's it. There's no other option. If I want to pick up this glass of water, I will pick up this glass of water. That is it. Freud was the first person that said, you know what if there's a subconscious mind? What if subconsciously I'm pushing the thought of, I'm thirsty, I want a drink of water, I want a drink of water. That brings it to my conscious mind, thus I reach for the cup, bring it up, and take a sip. Stay hydrated, my friends. So, Freud basically came up with this idea. It was the psychoanalytic theory. And for anyone who's been watching the Daniel Teaches Experience, I actually have notes today, so I don't go too far off topic, so that might be a new one. So basically, the psychoanalytic theory, the basis was Freud has these three main ideas. He said, in the brain, you are made up of the id, the superego, and the ego. He said the id is the part of your brain that looks for constant pleasure. It is for pleasure seeking. So it's if you wake up in a day, the id is going, okay man, you're going to play on your computer, on your Xbox for 10 hours today. Then you had the ego and the superego. And basically, the superego was the part that was the moral, that said, no, you know what? That's crazy. Let's think about what's right here. Okay, let's think rationally about this. You have to go do your homework, then you have to go to work, then you have to do this, you have to abide by the laws, you have to take care of yourself, right? So imagine it is one end of the spectrum, and the superego is the complete other end of the spectrum. And the ego, what that was, it was right in between the two. And basically what the ego was responsible for doing was, it was a moderator between the two. So all the ego would do, my friends, is it would subconsciously get messages from the id, and it would subconsciously get messages from the superego. And built off of what those two were saying, it would formulate it together and go, whoa, listen, we're not going to play on the computer for 10 hours today. But it's not just going to be about doing hard work and homework and doing laundry and chores. We want to have some fun too. So how about we go to work, we'll come home, we'll play half an hour on the computer, but then we'll go back to homework. So Freud believed that it was the ego and that it's every day was a constant tug of war between the id and the superego. Now the thing was that the id and superego are completely in the subconscious. We do not know that they exist. It is just the idea that the ego gets, which the ego was the reality. The ego was what came to the forefront. What was your conscious mind? And your superego and id were the things that were throwing these ideas towards you. Now, a lot of the times, my friends, you can understand why this was such a strong theory, because you got to understand why people were acting in certain ways. Because you could look at things like childhood, experience, habits, and then when this was a time when people really started looking into, routines, right? How do addictions happen? How do, even imagine you're driving on the road, you go into your head, you start thinking about something, all of a sudden, man, you've made it 2 blocks past without consciously thinking. How does that happen? Where do you go? Right? Because if there's only a conscious mind, where do you go? So even though a lot of what Freud said has been debunked and has been argued and responded to, the belief, he was responsible for bringing up the importance of the subconscious and the impact that it has on our day-to-day lives. Now, the second reason, my friends, why I believe Freud is the most famous psychologist in the world is because Freud came up with the idea of free association. What is free association? You already know what it is. Anytime you've seen psychology or a psychologist depicted in the movies, 9 out of 10 times it's this. There will be an individual lying on a couch. See where I'm taking this? And he's lying back and he's closed his eyes and he's just chilling out. Now there'll be a gentleman behind him, semi-casual, if not, pretty formally dressed, and he'll have a clipboard behind him, and he'll say something like, tell me anything that comes to your mind with no filter whatsoever. Just tell me everything. Okay, now when I say the color blue, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? What do you associate that with? Now if I say this person's name, Maggie, what comes to your mind? What do you associate that with? Freud was the person who came up with that. And basically, realizing this idea of how important the subconscious was, Freud wanted to investigate the subconscious, look at it and see how, what is the gateway between the subconscious and the conscious. And he thought the best way to do that was to have someone lie down on the couch. Now, he wouldn't be sitting beside them because he didn't want them to feel, intruded. He would sit back a couple of steps. And when he would ask these things, he would want the person to give their unfiltered opinion. in order to make it as raw as possible, as natural as possible, because when you're not filtering it, he wants the conscious mind to do as little work as possible, to keep it as original as possible from the unconscious mind. Does that kind of make sense? So Freud comes up with that idea of free association. It pops off. It starts working really, really well. Other psychologists around him, they take note. They're like, holy smokes, this is working really, really well. Now, next thing you see in those movies from Ever Since When to now, that's a classic scene, right? People are lying down on the couch, they're talking to their therapist. Free association is a very, very common practice used, not only because of the subconscious, but sometimes it's just a super easy way for someone to get something off of their chest. Sometimes just sitting here face to face, eye to eye, that's one way to do it, but Freud believed that free association is a way to really bridge the gap between subconscious and make it as raw, as natural, as unfiltered as possible, and bring it over to the conscious. And that, my friends, is why I believe Sigmund Freud was one of the most famous psychologists of all time, because in that critical period, he talked about those super important things and really, really emphasized the importance of the unconscious and left his mark in many, many ways on the psychological field.